Welcome back to Decentralized Radio, your one-stop shop for education on how you can take back control of your health and your wealth and live outside of the centralized systems that are plaguing our society. We're hosting industry experts every Tuesday live and also releasing podcasts Friday morning. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Our first topic is going to be about how Wyoming has taken a leadership position in decentralized money, blockchain, and we have Will Cole from Zaprite. We have Tyler Lindholm, who are both part of the Wyoming Blockchain Task Force a couple years ago. Tyler kind of led that effort, and we're going to have Colin moderate that, who works for the Secretary of State of Wyoming as well. So pretty cool way to kick it off and talk about how here in Wyoming we're kind of taking a leadership position in this regard.
All right. So I'm Colin. I work at the Secretary of State's office. I will introduce the two panelists here. We have Tyler Lindholm, who I believe was the majority whip in the State House here in Wyoming for much of the time that we're going to be talking about. And in addition, you were on a podcast with Caitlin Long and Trace Mayer, and that podcast is the reason why I'm here, because that was, I believe, in 2019, and you were talking about a lot of things, including the laws we're going to talk about, and that to make the plunge to move from North Carolina to Wyoming in 2021. And we also have Will Cole, who, as Tristan said, is now with Zaprite, but prior to that was one of the founders of Unchained, or early employees at Unchained, which of course is one of the most important Bitcoin custody and lending platforms out there still. So with that out of the way, I guess we should first talk about how did you all begin the process of bringing Bitcoin to Wyoming, and what did that initially look like with the blockchain task force and that sort of thing?
When I was first elected in 2014, I went into the legislatures. Really, I just wanted to make it easier for my grandma to sell pies around town. But I was also pretty geeky about Bitcoin and those types of things. So one of my first endeavors was to pass what's called the Wyoming Food Freedom Act, and I got that done in my first year, and I was like, well, shit, what do I do now? Well, I was pretty geeky about Bitcoin. I'd been involved. Anybody familiar with the Ron Paul forums back in the day? Yeah, there's a couple of liberty lovers out there. So that's why I learned about Bitcoin. And at that time, I'd become involved around 2012, 2013 time. And I thought in 2015, 16, Wyoming was kind of broke. Coal revenue was down, oil and gas revenue was down, and we were scrambling trying to figure out what to do, and we damn sure weren't going to raise taxes. So we had to figure out a solution. Well, everybody's talking about economic development. Well, I'm fairly libertarian, and I didn't want to spend government money, taxpayers' money, on attracting more businesses. That's cronyism. That's not capitalism. That sucks. So I was like, well, let's just bring Bitcoin to Wyoming, and we'll just do like the regulatory thing. And so I ran my first bill on Bitcoin in regards to the money transmitter license. That would have been in 2016. And got my ever-loving ass kicked by the Wyoming Division of Banking in committee. I was trying to explain, it was a really good lesson for me, because I was trying to explain to all these old legislators from Wyoming, to all these old ranchers. I was like, hey guys, Bitcoin's the future, it's going to be great, all these things. That's not how you talk to that generation about Bitcoin. Instead, I should have been like, this is about economic development. Let's keep the babies in Wyoming. Let's introduce new technology, and it won't cost you a thing. All we got to do is set regulatory parameters. We were able to figure that out. We did that the next year after I got my ass kicked in 2016. 2017, we came out with 5 pieces of legislation, and at that time I'd made good friends with someone that was supposed to be here due to a medical emergency, couldn't be, was Caitlin Long. Became good friends with her and several others, and we started moving together a slew of bills. And as that legislation was moving through the process, a really fascinating thing happened. There's a company out of Nova Scotia that flew down to Wyoming while the bills hadn't even passed, and we're like, we're moving our business here. You're so forward thinking. I was like, holy shit, that works. And so At that time, I drafted up an amendment to the budget where I created the Wyoming Blockchain Task Force as just a little one-liner in the budget, and we were able to get that task force stood up, and folks started getting appointed to it. And Will was he was the first governor's appointee, and I think you were put there to keep an eye on me.
To keep the shitcoiners out of Wyoming.
Right. It's true. It's true. So we were able to put this together really quick, and we got together as a team, a very nimble, small team. So for other states, if you're in another state and you're like, we need to do this in New Mexico or wherever, first, you'll fail. You should probably just move to Wyoming. But second, if you do this, make this a very small, nimble team. You don't want 20 people. Colorado put together a blockchain task force. It's so dumb, right? There's like 20 people on it, and you had 12 talking heads from industry and 10 politicians, and it doesn't work, right? You need like a nimble, small team, 5 or 6 forward-thinking people that are willing to do the study and read up on security law, banking law, and those types of things to be able to understand what the hell they're doing in the first place.
Yeah, I was just invited along for the ride that Tyler started, but I can compare it to other places. Tyler mentioned that Colorado tried this, Texas tried this. It wasn't actually a legislative body; it was it's like an NGO, like a lobbying trade association type group, and you just can't get things done that way. That's going one legislator by legislator trying to lobby them. The fact that it was a legislative body, that it also had private citizens, which I got invited to for 2019, was really exceptional and still unique to what other states are trying to do. And I also think it's the reason that Wyoming actually got stuff done, got bills passed, and attracted new companies to come to Wyoming. I'll say that, I guess I get painted with some derogatory terms. I like them, actually, Bitcoin maximalist or maxi or whatever, but I'm also a 10th Amendment maximalist. And it surprises me how many states are willing to cede their sovereignty and not actually stand up for themselves, because the 10th Amendment is a big deal and state sovereignty is a huge deal, and Wyoming actually flexed their sovereign muscles and said, we're going to do it. That's why I joined. I think that it's a model for other states. Really what other states have done so far is they've just copied the bills. They didn't copy the process in which those bills were made, which is good for Wyoming, bad for the other states. I would also say, though, that you have no idea how wild these guys got for a while. When I joined, I was like, hey, why don't we try to make Bitcoin legal tender in the state? And they're like, man, we tried. Turns out it's unconstitutional. And it's like, oh, okay, why don't we try? But they were thinking about pushing the bounds at that level, right? Of what can we get away with? What are we allowed to do? Let's do everything we're allowed to do. I remember talking to Tyler and saying have we engaged with the UCC on some of the stuff? And they're like, yeah, they want to wait 2 years. So we just said no and did it, right? And I was like, okay, I'm joining. I'm in. And in the time I was there, something like 20-something bills got passed. I take no credit for it. The legislators did it, but we were able to educate a lot of people and raise the profile for Wyoming in the process. And there are dozens of companies that decided to domicile here, create jobs here. I think we're just scratching the surface of what it can do for the state, what that task force did back in 2017, 2018, 2019. We haven't seen the full benefits of it yet, but it's starting to happen.
Well, I can definitely say that a prominent oil field services company, who is represented here, did announce earlier this year that that their American subsidiary is formed in Wyoming, and that at some point they may be establishing a presence here.
Yeah, upstream data.
Upstream data, yeah.
Great.
And we beat out Texas and Tennessee, which is awesome.
Well, they're Canadian. This feels more like home.
Yeah. But you brought up the 10th Amendment stuff, and one of the interesting aspects, is, especially with the speedy banks, is the pushback that the speedy banks and the state of Wyoming is getting from the feds. does seem that Caitlin's bank, she's filed an appeal in the 10th Circuit, and based on my reading of the case, seems like she's got a pretty good chance. But there's a lot of other aspects that the state needs to step up on and fight back against the feds. Do you see how do you see those efforts continuing with the current administrations, both state and federal?
Sure. I'll start with Speedy Banks, just so you'll know what they are. The SPDIs, Special Purpose Depository Institutions. It was a really forward-looking idea from Tyler and Caitlin and others that essentially set up a new corporate formation that is a bank, a non-lending bank, which is non-fractional, like fully reserved. And I'll throw out my theory on this. And so, like, basically what a non-fractional bank does is that they take your money and then they just hold it, like they're supposed to, and don't give it
It's
to
like a mattress.
They don't give it to other people, and then then go under 4 years later and take your money with them. Now you can see why that would upset the Fed, because if there was such an institution that existed and such a corporate formation that existed, capital would flow out of these risky fractional reserve banks, and the Feds can't have that happen, right? Like, that would ruin the credit system in the United States, because all of a sudden you have sound money and sound banks. Like, that's a disaster for the current banking system in the United States and can't be allowed to happen. It also happens to be legal, and so while they've hit road bumps so far, I fully expect eventually for SPDI charters to be granted in the state of Wyoming. And when that happens, I think that is kind of the secret sauce, that brings jobs and brings economic prosperity to the state. That's outside, that's sort of like outside of the ranching, type of businesses that are already here. Ultimately, this is one of those, 10th Amendment things, which is, Wyoming did this before. They invented LLCs, and but these guys, in their wisdom, I'm going to talk you up a little bit here.
I'll take it.
Okay, yeah. In their wisdom, this time they didn't mess it up like they did back in the 70s, right? Which is they set up a chancery court, so all the case law that will occur around SPDIs, where you get the regulatory certainty around operating your business and making sure you're not going to go to jail next year because you're doing something that you thought was legal turns out to be illegal. That's all hosted here in Wyoming, so all the case law, all the businesses can operate here. It's really, think Delaware for LLCs. That's what Delaware did. That's why everyone domiciles their businesses there. So I do think, like, that in particular, there were a lot of good things that happened over the early days of the Blockchain Task Force, but the SPDIs, I think, is kind of, I think Caitlin refers to it as like the killer app. I tend to agree with that. Right now, we haven't seen it yet because the feds are fighting against it, because it breaks their business model of ripping people off. But eventually, I think it's legal, and again, 10th Amendment maximalist, states are allowed to do things like this, and it'll benefit Wyoming.
Think of it like a mutual. So they're allowed to charge their customer fees for being that proverbial mattress. And there's also an agreement there as far as non-digital assets that are being held can be invested, those types of things, upon agreement between each customer. So you have to agree unto yourself.
Yeah, it's not just you throw it in a bucket and it gets lent out, and then you have it's outside of the world of FDIC because people are opting into the program. Also, like, think about it like physical bearer instruments like gold. It's like you pay a fee for custody. I think that's actually a more honest way to do the banking. It's like, well, if you're going to hold something for me, I'll just pay you money for it, instead of you having this roundabout way of, like, taking my stuff and taking risk with my assets that I don't even know about. Right?
Yeah. It's not just that's one very important point, but another aspect, do you remember Silicon Valley Bank, the failure? Many small businesses that did not bank with them were impacted because their payroll companies used Silicon Valley Bank. So if your payroll was in flight at that moment, you may have just lost your payroll. Even though the FDIC stepped in and made everyone whole, some states, for instance Nevada, if you don't make your payroll on time, then you are liable for 300% of the payroll. So because that bank failed, even though you didn't have a banking relationship with them, your payroll provider did, and they couldn't make that payroll that day, you may now be on the hook for 3 times what your payroll was, and put a lot of strain on a bunch of small businesses. If you had to pay a higher fee because the bank wasn't making money from loans, but you were assured that that would never happen, well, my small business would absolutely put it there and make sure that that everything flowed through a bank that could never happen to, because that's a death sentence, even though you're made whole at the end of the day.
If I could really quick too on the Speedy, I like talking about the name of Speedies because it's a happy coincidence that it's called a Speedy. It wasn't on purpose. None of us are smart enough with acronyms to come up with a cool acronym. It's actually the Bankers Association in the state of Wyoming who absolutely hates us, as you can imagine. That's how good of a job I think we did, is the Bankers Association hates us. In fact, they participated in my last campaign and were successful. I was kicked out of it. I was unelected based on these types of stances. The unfortunate part for them now is I run the largest conservative grassroots organization in the state of Wyoming, so I still own their ass. But the bankers came out swinging hard on this, and their big deal was like, "Hey, listen, we won't put up a fight if you call it something other than a bank. We just don't want to be associated with you. You guys are gross." I was like, "All right, well, give us a name."
Too safe for us.
Yeah. What do you guys want to? What do you want to call us? We'll call it like an institution. So I was like, all right, so special purpose depository institution it is. And Speedy, this acronym, came about from, they still fought us, and we ultimately kicked their ass 54-7. But it's kind of a happy coincidence. The other thing I want to touch on, and this is really relative for Caitlin, because Caitlin is at the very forefront of this fight. And she's taking it to the Federal Reserve, and it has gone all the way to the Federal Reserve in D.C., where this fight is really originating from. In our original draft of the legislation that Will helped us put together, you were part of the committee. You were on there. One of the things that we voted on to include in that legislation was a provision that the Attorney General for the state of Wyoming shall sue the Federal Reserve if our master account is blocked, knowing that this was going to be a problem. And the Federal Reserve came to us because we were working in concert with them, trying to be a good partner, saying, "Hey, what do you think of this legislation?" They said, there's one provision where you're going to sue the shit out of us. Everything else looks great. It's fine. If you would remove that, right on. And so we were like, "Oh, you're a good partner. It's Federal Reserve. It's not the Jekyll from..." And so anyways, we removed it. And there's legislative history that can be found in that legislation as far as removing that piece. It was in the Minerals Committee where we removed it. And that we were wrong for doing that. And now the Blockchain Select Committee is putting that back in law, that the Attorney General shall sue on behalf of these companies that do form in the state of Wyoming.
If you're a health-conscious food consumer who's also very active, you know how big of a struggle it is to find a bar that is both convenient and nutrient dense. That's why I was so excited when I discovered the Alpa Bar. The Alpa Bar is a meat-based bar that contains only simple ingredients, 100% grass-fed beef, tallow, and honey, and is both nutrient dense and convenient, and packs a caloric punch of over 300 calories. For me, this was a game changer and is now the go-to snack and fuel source I use when I'm hiking, camping, hunting, skiing, or doing anything in the outdoors and I don't have the resources to cook a full meal. The Alpa Bar is made proudly in Colorado and only uses locally sourced meat. JJ and Rob are also extremely based and accept Bitcoin for payment. I highly recommend you check out the Alpa Bar for any time you need a nutrient-dense and convenient snack on the go. Check them out at eatalpa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout to get a 5% discount. And if you pay in Bitcoin, you can get an additional discount on top of that. That's eataupa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout.
Yeah, so the background on this is our wonderful senator from Massachusetts, Pocahontas, has decided to fight Bitcoin specifically with all her might, and it turns out that she's very well organized in this. You shouldn't take her lightly. She might be a joke, and she is a joke, but she's not incompetent. It's very well organized. She had a deal with the Biden administration when she dropped out of the presidential race that gave her de facto control over Treasury. Treasury, of course, has FinCEN and other things like that under their purview, and they have been weaponized in something called Operation Choke Point. This isn't like conspiracy theory stuff. This is just on the record. A bank like Silvergate out of San Diego that banked a lot of the Bitcoin and crypto businesses was put out of business as a matter of policy. They were never insolvent, ever. They met $6 billion of withdrawals over 2 weeks and met every single one of them. Name me another bank that could do that. They don't exist, right? But
Custodia.
Yeah. But like, they're not allowed to operate. Is that under the current rules? So basically, they weaponize the federal government through Treasury, through Pocahontas to specifically target this industry. When it comes to SEC, I think it's more of a mixed bag. It's first of all, it's been very ineffectual, where the Treasury's been effective, and Elizabeth Warren's attacks have been effective. Treasury's been a little bit more, SEC's been a little bit more bumbling. So, I do say Bitcoin and crypto. I see them as separate things for a lot of reasons. Mostly for the Bitcoin companies, the SEC's been nothing. Like, not positive, not negative. It's just been sort of par for the course, stuff. I would say in the crypto sphere, it's been a little bit more unnerving because specifically Gensler has a position that many of the altcoins that aren't Bitcoin are in fact securities. You're not going to hear a lot of sympathy for me on that, and I'll explain that in my next. I'm talking a lot today, so I'll explain why I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, or that I don't really care, and I don't think most people should care. But I will say that like the Treasury attacks are trying to undermine all of the infrastructure. But we have an election coming up, and that sweetheart deal between bumbling Joe Biden and Pocahontas might blow up. So,
with a separate aspect outside of the Treasury SEC axis is what Elizabeth Warren and her cronies tried to do with the Energy Information Authority, the EIA, which with this emergency survey that they attempted to pass in a stunning defeat of the federal government, where the Riot and Texas Blockchain sued to block that. The feds rolled over so hard that they paid attorney's fees. That's unheard of for the federal government to pay attorney's fees. And one of the reasons why it is, several people have speculated they did that, is because Elizabeth Warren may have had undue influence on the operation of that executive agency, and in discovery that would have come out. So they basically gave up everything immediately as soon as they were challenged.
But I'll bring it back to kind of this for a second, which is like, at the end of the day, I think we over-index on what the feds are doing and under-index on what the states are doing. Like, that the federal government can cause headaches for us, but ultimately the states are going to decide how this industry is regulated and in whether or not it thrives in the United States. The feds can put up roadblocks, but they can't win a long-term battle.
I think it's also important to note we've got the answer to Pocahontas. We've got Senator Cynthia Lummis in the Senate, the queen of Bitcoin, who's doing all the heavy lifting, and she continues to do a fantastic job. And that's that also kind of harkens back to why state-led initiatives are so important. Is Senator Lummis, before Wyoming had done what it had done, thanks to her son-in-law, was very much a fan of Bitcoin. By the way, her son-in-law is right here. So that's a happy coincidence. So she was already a fan, but it's tough to be able to carry water on something that just your son-in-law is a fan of. But her being able to take that message forward as a state, because the state-led initiative had already taken off, made it really easy for her to be able to plant her flag in doing so. And so if you're in another state and you're thinking about should I or should I not do this, if you're effective and can get this done, you'll carry your 2 U.S. senators also. Certainly Senator John Barrasso is not as outspoken as Cynthia is, but he votes correctly.
He's an ally.
Yeah, he votes correctly because Wyoming took that challenge on. And so these other states definitely need to be doing these things. Now you see Texas with Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, they're allies, they're voting correctly. And the list goes on. So especially important if you're in a Democrat-led state is finding a way forward on a state-led initiative.
Well, if you're in a Democrat-led state, at least be in the West, because they understand energy policy, which was a huge overlap with this. And so there's Western Democrats like Ron Wyden in Oregon that are actually on board with this. I see it as more of a West-East thing, energy versus pro-energy versus ESG thing. More than I see it as a Republican-Democrat type thing, although it's mostly Republican-Democrat type thing. But yeah, I mean, like, to what Tyler said is that, like, if you're in Wyoming, you're very well represented on this.
All right, so in y'all's opinions, what is the next step that Wyoming should take to continue this road and keep pushing harder?
I'm outspoken. There's going to be bad things that come up anytime you put a group of legislators together, and so as an example, this last year the Blockchain Select Committee, who I'm no longer involved with, and neither is Will. They put forward some pretty good pieces of legislation that are making a difference, but they also put forward bad legislation. They were trying to regulate AI, and so as a founder and the former chairman of that select committee, I found myself testifying against a piece of legislation that my friends had put forward, and they were pretty upset when I killed their bill. But it was a dumb bill and it needed to die, so I don't feel bad about that. I do think that there is a lot of work that still needs to be looked at in regards to the UCC, and there's a lot of really good things that can be accomplished in that space. The ULC has put out their new model. Caitlin Long and myself were both official observers when they were putting together their new model. And that's a long story of a war that shook out between Wyoming and the ULC while we were doing what we were doing. And they were putting together a piece that actually mandated that you had to go through an intermediary to hold digital assets. Thankfully, Wyoming won that fight, and now the ULC has a better model of their UCC. But I do think that there is a lot of work that needs to be looked at very closely in the multitude of different assets out there, whether you want to buy the shitcoins or not. The reality is the government has a responsibility to protect its consumers and its citizens, and so you've got to find a way that covers a lot of these very different assets under Wyoming law. So that needs to happen. The security law needs updated. We've got a uniform security law that a lot of other states look at. Insurance law needs to be poured over. I think there's a lot of merit in developing. Regulatory sandboxes don't work. We've all heard of the sandboxes, right? Hell, me and Will have passed a couple sandboxes. They just don't work. People aren't going to sign up for them. How many did you get at the Secretary of State's office? 0.
And no competent people work on them.
Right. Yeah. Nobody's going to do it. Right. So that idea needs to go away. We need to be very, very specific around insurance law. I think insurance is probably going to be one of the next big things as far as these assets are concerned.
I'll go in a different direction. I just pretended for half a year to be into politics, and so what I would say, Wyoming has a really interesting opportunity, which is it has this thing that only 3 other states have, which Wyoming has its own sovereign wealth fund, the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. It's hundreds of billions of dollars, or tens of billions of dollars?
Right.
60,
at this point,
like
it's at $25 billion.
Oh,
which
it's smaller.
It doesn't sound like a lot.
That's a lot.
But if you put it per capita, that puts Wyoming as the largest sovereign wealth fund in the United States, as far as the owners of it being the people of Wyoming.
So the fact that they have this vehicle, this instrument, which is basically funded through the extraction and transportation of natural resources in Wyoming, used to the benefit of the citizens of Wyoming, is Wyoming needs to buy Bitcoin. So Wyoming doesn't have the power of the printing press. It can't just print money and buy Bitcoin, which someone's going to do here pretty soon, which is going to be a scary thing when it happens. The Swiss, for instance, Swiss have the Swiss franc. They print francs and they buy U.S. equities for free, right? Wyoming can't do that. So how are they going to keep up? They should buy Bitcoin. I have a 7-year email chain with the CIO of the state of Wyoming, trying to convince them to put a 2% allocation into Bitcoin. And with the sales pitch of your biggest problem is going to be rebalancing when it becomes 70% of the, which it would have been if they had done that in 2016 when I sent them the first time. So I think it's actually a matter of like, when we talk about Wyoming sovereignty, I think it's absolutely imperative that Wyoming lead the charge on this, which means that there are elections that matter in the state that can force that issue, which mostly lives in the treasurer's office, and allowing the CIO to go out and do something to put Wyoming on the best financial footing for the future possible. It does not. They're allowed to buy it, and the alternative assets provision for, they could do it today if they wanted to.
The bummer deal about this, because you're talking about Patrick, right?
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, Patrick, and he's fantastic.
He would do it.
I think he's a pain in the ass about it, because I've hit him up about it over whiskey. That might be the problem. But one of the so here's the solution. Here's what I propose: is the CapFin task force has governor appointee positions on it.
Yeah.
So let's just get you appointed.
Okay, I'll do it again.
Yeah. Because then at that point,
I know how to buy Bitcoin.
Right. Because the legislature could force the treasurer's office at that point.
They could force the issue, but there's nothing blocking them from doing it right now. I think that it's mostly that the CIO's, he's responsible to the elected positions ultimately, right? And so I'm not trying to trash anyone on this at all, right? It is a risky thing to do, but it is also, you can do it in a risk minimized way. And I can't think of anything that Wyoming could do to put future generations in a better position than to do the easiest thing possible, which is we don't have to pass any crazy laws. We just need to buy Bitcoin and sit on it for 10 years. Yeah. Equities and like, well, she had to change a lot of things. I don't know the specifics of everything, but it was the options available to the treasurer were very limited when she was there, and she had to get legislation passed just to be able to do things like private equity and alternative investments that weren't just throw it into some bonds, government bonds and stuff like that, like, which was a poor use of the capital for the citizens. So she actually, I think, tripled the size of that fund over 4 or 8 years, something like that. Yeah, it was great.
And it's grown to the point now. I mean, Wyoming's third leg of our stool as far as income is capital gains. And there's no other state in the nation that can boast that we make more money off of our money than we do any of our other sectors. Yep. Right? So our number one leg of the stool, of course, hopefully will remain our natural resources, our minerals. If you're one of those people that want to fight me on coal, I will take you behind that stable and beat you like a dog.
I've been trying to buy a coal plant.
Yeah. Reliability and affordability. Let's stop putting people's lights out. But it's such a inspiration to be able to watch a state, instead of increasing their taxes, instead of finding new ways to tax, just flexing their muscle as far as capital gains are concerned. And it's really been a benefit to the people of Wyoming, because we've been able to avoid a lot of taxation. And we've got more money now than we ever have just by flexing.
Yeah, and with the certainly this current administration doing everything they can to attack our extraction industries, we even putting something in Bitcoin would be a way to hedge against that risk, which hopefully we don't have to deal with in 7 months. So
agree.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. I'll come bring you the mic. Are you self-employed or a small business owner and are tired of paying hundreds of dollars a month to centralized health insurance companies for minimal coverage because there is no alternative? Well, I have good news for you. There is. And this podcast is brought to you by CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a more decentralized alternative to health insurance. and it uses community and crowdfunding to help its members pay for emergencies when they do happen. They incentivize and prioritize health and personal responsibility and share the thought that you should really only be using the centralized healthcare system when emergencies do happen. This is what I am on board with, and I have personally signed up for Crowd Health since I left the corporate engineering world and the medical benefits that come with it. If you want to learn more, you can check out our episode with CEO and founder Andy Schoonover, or you can head over to joincrowdhealth.com and use code DRADIO, DRADIO, when you sign up to get a discounted rate of only $99 for the first 3 months. Centralized healthcare is one of the biggest issues in our society today, and I really love what Crowd Health is doing to provide an alternative for people who care.
While he's getting ready to get that mic, I got a really funny saying I heard the other week. Strip mining prevents forest fires. Do you guys know that? I'm getting some stickers.
Those
made.
are really good fire lines. Yeah.
So I know in Alaska, their sovereign wealth fund is sort of distributed to citizens.
Yeah.
They pay out like $1,000 a year if you're an Alaskan citizen. What is sort of the long-term plan of the Wyoming sovereign wealth fund?
In a really dumbed down way, the Wyoming Sovereign Wealth Fund makes it so Wyoming doesn't have to charge state income taxes and things like that, right? And so like the state has obligations that it has to pay for, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund is there to help meet those obligations. So if there's a shortage in school funding, they raid the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. I think that's a reasonable thing for the state of Wyoming to be doing, is saying like, we'll find different ways not to tax you because we're doing this over there. That's the primary purpose of it.
And it's always great to see every legislative session when, we've had a good year like this. Last year was good for us on capital gains, and there was a lot of articles and papers across the state bemoaning the fact that Wyoming socked away another $500 million. They were like, we could have used that for X. Right, yeah. That's what they'll try. Right, yeah.
I do want to point out though is that like, a lot of capital gains. That sounds great, but like this is what happens in a hyperinflationary environment, right? You think you're getting rich off of your investments, but you're not, right? So if your capital gains are up, 30%, right? But actual inflation, because the CPI is a rigged, absolutely useless metric to use, is 40%, then you got poorer during that time. It's not enough that the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund is growing. It needs to be in an asset that can basically, it's not even a hedge. It needs to be in an asset that doesn't intentionally debase like the dollar.
Yeah, absolutely. The one other thing to think about when he was talking about the wealth fund increased by 500 million, you said, Wyoming has very few revenue sources. I happen to be in charge of one of the largest revenue sources for the state outside of those things, which is the Secretary of State's office. And it's the second largest revenue generating outside of taxes. And we only bring in 50 million. So the state is running themselves off of the sovereign wealth fund and extraction taxes and other things. And that is why we don't have the crazy income taxes, which if you know the history of the income tax, it is probably the most damaging to individual freedom over the lifetime of its existence than almost any other policy that you can have.
And unlike Texas, where I was born, Wyoming doesn't have insane property taxes. On top of that, I mean, like, they do have obligations. This pays for it.
Any other questions from the crowd?
I would fight that. No, I hope she didn't say that.
Don't invite the vipers.
No, I think what Kate Lindholm did say is that in the and we were talking about up there,
like, no.
that the state of Wyoming there's discussion about passing a law where the state of Wyoming would achieve its own personal master account, which is something that
Texas actually does that. Yeah. So it's about the state getting a Fed master account. It's actually brilliant. Like, that should happen. Now, I can see why, 5 years ago, 6 years ago when this was going on, why people wouldn't have wanted to do that. But given the current situation, I think it's one of the best options available.
Right. And that was something that we had considered years ago. And we push back on that ideology because we don't want to see the government grow, right? And all of a sudden the government has a Fed master account. I don't like the government at all. But, times being what they are, with the Federal Reserve clearly fighting what is a legal business entity within the state of Wyoming, what's our next best option?
Yeah. I would support that.
All right, we have a question here.
Yeah, I was wondering, why is it considered unconstitutional to make Bitcoin legal tender in Wyoming?
Well, great question.
It's a good question.
The Constitution states that all powers not vested to the federal government go to the states. Well, that one's vested to the federal government. It turns out,
and not just vested to the federal government. Specifically, only gold and silver coinage is legal tender in the United States, and that's in the plain text of the Constitution.
Yeah, I still think you could push some buttons there, but you're going to lose.
Yeah, that's where gold is recognized as legal tender in the state of Wyoming, and we made that stance very clear. That was actually while I was in also. That was Roy Edwards that ran that bill. That's how you can get away with gold and silver. But with Bitcoin, it not being specifically called out in the U.S. Constitution, that's where we run into the wall. Now, granted, at this point in the game, I kind of like being in lawsuits with the federal government, so damn the torpedo. I don't know.
Well, we also have more of a leg to stand on because El Salvador made it legal tender, which actually makes it an easier path in the United States to use as legal tender. So I feel like if the task force were to take that on now, they have a more credible chance of succeeding. I mean, it's still going to be a huge, ridiculous fight, but where before it was basically impossible, because another sovereign already recognizes it as legal tender, it actually does make things simpler. In the Constitution.
Article 1, Section 10, Clause 6? I don't know. I'll look it up and get it back to you. Yeah.
Always have an attorney with you. This is why.
Any more questions? All right, I have one. There's a lot of folks. How many folks here are living in Wyoming? And raise your hand. That's pretty good. Wow. Amazing. So not everyone, but I think this question could apply to everyone in the audience is, what's the best way for an individual in their community to try and proliferate change at the state level in terms of this legislation that you've all talked about brilliantly here for the last half hour?
So I lead a grassroots organization, so it would be silly of me not to brag about grassroots opportunities. Get to know your state rep and state senator. Ask them out for coffee. It's just like dating a lady, right? You want to go out to coffee first. You're not marrying them right off the bat. Go out to coffee. Talk to them about what you're interested in, how this is part of your life, those types of things. And then just make friends with them. So it'll get to the point, and it's so easy, and it's such an easy model. Wyoming is such a small town with very long streets. Just you introducing yourself to a state rep or state senator, they'll learn to rely on you when these bills come up, when these Bitcoin bills come up that you're passionate about. They'll be picking up the phone, calling you and saying, hey, what do I do here? And so your capability in that really cannot be, overstated. It's really important. Take them out to breakfast. Americans for Prosperity? Yeah. We're a small organization, 38 state chapters. But Wyoming, it's a small.
I'll echo a little bit of what Tyler's saying, but I'll add on to it, which is, one of the things that inspired me in my little brief stint in politics, serving on the task force, is that it made me realize it's such a waste of time worrying about all the stuff that's happening at the federal level, right? Is like I obsessing over who's going to be president and what's going on in the Senate and all that type of stuff. Sure, there's important things happening there, but it's so abstracted from you that it's so nebulous, right? That it's overwhelming to have an effect at the federal level. On the state level, it's imminently possible. Imminently, especially in Wyoming, where it's a small place. You can take them out to coffee, right? And that the Wyoming legislature has shown over the past few years that they're willing to actually take risks and do things to represent their people that will piss off the federal government, right? So if you can affect change locally. I know that sounds kind of silly, but you really can, especially in Wyoming. And there are elections.
Run for office. Guys, I don't have a degree. Like Sundance High School, go Bulldogs. That's my only degree I've got in my name, right? I raise cows for a living. That's it. And I was able to change security law, banking law. We were able to kick Alexander Hamilton in his dead teeth by passing that special purpose depository institution. It's because we made ourselves the only people in the room that actually knew what the hell we were talking about. And the Wyoming legislature is still very much a republic. And it still trusts on the people that they represent. And it's such a good process. You know, I've got friends and enemies in the Wyoming legislature, but I would still rather take all of them, all of those people I disagree with, than any one Congress critter. So it's really worth it. Except for maybe Cynthia.
That's fine.
Yeah.
We can talk crap about it.
All right, we'll have one or two more questions, then wrap up.
This question's a little bit more specific to the local level. I don't know if you have experience with towns in small cities being able to invest in Bitcoin, and more specifically, what's the best way for them to allocate those funds, like through maybe which businesses? And I'm guessing it'd probably be through using an ETF, but have you guys had any experience with that, or do you know any examples of towns doing that?
I got it real quick. We actually passed a law on this in 2019, allowing local municipalities and counties to be able to bond themselves in digital assets. They could bond themselves in Bitcoin. So it's possible. It is possible for them to do that. I would be interested to see it done, to see a local town. I hate local government. I think they're probably the biggest barrier to economic development in any community, anywhere. They're just the worst. That being said, they have more capability than the state does in this regard, and they could certainly do it. I think it would be fascinating to see.
Yeah, I haven't seen an example of that. I've seen some other initiatives, like in North Texas, outside of Dallas. There's been towns where there were like local initiatives to for free get local businesses set up to accept Bitcoin, point of sale, that type of thing, and doing like, you know, educational things on how to custody it and stuff like that. I haven't seen like the Muni stuff work. I know it's legal to do, but I mean, yeah, do it. Don't do the ETF though. Like set up custody. Like hold keys, hold private keys. That's how you really do it. And there's plenty of expertise in the town to hold private keys.
I agree with that, but it's also like how to do it the first time, and then what's the best legal way to do it, and that might be the ETF, which is getting down
if you want
to
dip your toe in, but like get out of that as fast as possible.
But yeah, Tristan and I are in Thermopolis, and that's maybe something we would be willing to work on if anyone wants to kind of
run for city council and then dissolve the council.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Cool. Well, I think the takeaway, I'm just going to wrap it up. Thanks so much. I think the takeaway is get involved. I mean, you don't have to be from Wyoming. Yes, it's amazing here. You just heard a great marketing pitch for moving here, it sounds like. But I think getting involved at the local level is really the key takeaway. We're not going to make any progress. And potentially, if you become educated and then educate your local politicians, you can get that credibility and build that momentum. And then you can prove Tyler wrong about local politicians. So thank you guys so much.